The universe was vast, filled with mysteries and dangers. For centuries, humanity had looked to the stars, wondering if they were alone. When the answer finally came, it was not the peaceful encounter they had hoped for. The Zarkalians arrived without warning. Their massive warships pierced through the void, dark and menacing, hovering over the human colony of Epsilon Prime. At first, there was hope that they came in peace, hope that this would be a historic moment of unity between species. That hope was shattered in an instant. A meeting of two worlds. The United Earth Council, UEC, desperate to establish peaceful relations, sent a diplomatic team to meet with the Zarkalian leaders. The meeting was held aboard a neutral space station orbiting Epsilon Prime. The human diplomats, dressed in formal attire, stepped forward with extended hands and hopeful smiles. The Zarkalians did not shake hands. Instead, Supreme Warlord Kratak, the leader of the alien fleet, sneered at them, his reptilian eyes filled with contempt. The Zarkalians were a warrior race, built for conquest. To them, peace was a weakness, and humanity's desire for diplomacy was an insult. "You are fragile," Kratak hissed, his voice cold and sharp. "Your kind is not fit to rule among the stars." The head diplomat, Ambassador Elliot Graves, remained calm. "We come in peace. There is no need for hostility. Our people can share knowledge, trade resources." Kratak laughed, a harsh and guttural sound. "Your resources already belong to us. Your planets, your ships, your people, they will serve the Zarkalian Empire." The ambassador's face hardened. "We will never surrender." Kratak's eyes gleamed with amusement. "Then you will burn." And with a single motion of his clawed hand, the massacre began. Betrayal and bloodshed. Without warning, Zarkalian soldiers opened fire. Plasma blasts filled the room, cutting down the unarmed diplomats before they could even react. Screams echoed through the halls as the human delegation was mercilessly slaughtered. But the betrayal did not stop there. At that same moment, Zarkalian warships descended upon Epsilon Prime, their cannons raining destruction on the helpless colony. Buildings crumbled, streets turned to fire, and millions of innocent lives were lost in mere hours. The humans on the ground fought back as best they could, but they were outmatched. The Zarkalians had planned this attack for years, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. It was not a war, it was an execution. Humanity's response. The news spread like wildfire across the United Earth territories. The footage of the massacre, the murdered diplomats, the burning cities, the smug expression on Kratak's face, ignited a fury like never before. For centuries, humanity had fought among themselves. Nations had waged wars over borders, power, and greed. But now, for the first time in history, Earth stood as one. The United Earth Defense Force, UEDF, was mobilized immediately. Every warship, every soldier, every resource was dedicated to one cause: survival. Admiral Marcus Hayes, leader of the UEDF, stood before a massive gathering of Earth's military forces. His voice was calm but firm, filled with the weight of history. "The Zarkalians believe we are weak," he said. "They think we will surrender. They think we will kneel." He paused, his sharp eyes scanning the faces of soldiers, pilots, and officers alike. "They are wrong." A roar of agreement surged through the ranks. "This is not just a fight for revenge," Hayes continued. "This is a fight for our future, for our children, for every human being who dreams of the stars." He pointed toward the screen behind him, displaying a map of Zarkalian-controlled space. "We will not hide. We will not surrender. We will fight. The war begins." Within days, the first human fleets were deployed to stop the Zarkalian advance. Warships clashed in the darkness of space, planets turned into battlefields, and the once peaceful colonies of Earth became fortresses. The Zarkalians had expected fear and surrender. Instead, they found fire and resistance. The war had begun, and humanity would not go down without a fight. The war had begun. Earth refused to kneel. The Zarkalians had assumed humanity would crumble under the weight of their superior technology and sheer numbers. They were wrong. The first battle was about to begin, and it would set the tone for the war to come. The invasion of Mars. The red planet, Mars, was humanity's largest and most developed colony. With massive domed cities and industrial hubs producing warships and weapons, it was a key strategic point. The United Earth Defense Force, UEDF, knew the Zarkalians would strike Mars first. Admiral Marcus Hayes had no intention of letting it fall. "Listen up," he barked, standing in front of his fleet's commanders. His grizzled face was etched with determination. "The Zarkalians think we're weak. They think we'll run. Let's remind them who they're dealing with." The room erupted in agreement. Mars was defended by a fleet of human warships, orbital cannons, and planetary defense shields. But would it be enough? The Zarkalian armada arrives. The Zarkalian fleet pierced into the Martian system like a swarm of locusts, blotting out the stars with their sheer numbers. "Incoming enemy vessels," shouted Lieutenant Carter, gripping the controls of the UEDF warship Valor. There's too many." The UEDF officers stared at the screens. The Zarkalians had brought hundreds of warships, each bristling with plasma cannons and heavy bombers. Their goal was clear: total planetary annihilation. Admiral Hayes narrowed his eyes. Let them come. The battle erupts. As soon as the first wave of enemy ships entered range, Mars' orbital cannons fired. Blazing blue energy blasts tore through the darkness, striking Zarkalian ships with explosive force. The battle quickly became a chaotic inferno. Human battleships unleashed everything they had, their railguns and missile barrages tearing into the enemy ranks. Fighter squadrons weaved between laser fire, dogfighting against the Zarkalian bombers. Zarkalian dropships attempted to breach the planet's surface, but Mars' defense systems rained destruction upon them. Despite their overwhelming numbers, the Zarkalians were shocked at the resistance. This isn't possible," growled Commander Xyrol, one of the Zarkalian warlords. "They are just humans." But humanity was fighting with something more powerful than technology. They were fighting for their survival. Ryan Carter's heroic stand. In the middle of the battle, Lieutenant Ryan Carter, an ace pilot, found himself outnumbered 5-1. His squad had been decimated, and his ship was damaged. But retreat? Not an option. Taking a deep breath, Carter pushed his fighter to its limits. Diving through enemy fire, he used every trick in the book, rolling, dodging, weaving through the chaos. He took down one enemy, then another and another. His ship danced like lightning through the battlefield. A transmission crackled in his headset. "Carter, pull back. You're in too deep." "Not yet," Carter growled. "I see their command ship. I'm taking the shot." With a final, desperate maneuver, he fired a direct missile strike at the Zarkalian command vessel. The explosion ripped through the ship's core, sending shockwaves through their fleet. The enemy faltered. The humans pressed the advantage. Victory, but at a cost. After hours of brutal combat, the remaining Zarkalian ships retreated, their forces shattered. Mars had survived. The cheers erupted across the comm channels, but it was bittersweet. Hundreds of human pilots, soldiers, and civilians had died. The surface of Mars was scared. The battle was won, but the war was just beginning. As Carter landed his damaged fighter back on Mars, he looked at the burning wreckage around him. He knew one thing: the Zarkalians would be back. And next time, it would be even worse. Mars had survived, but barely. The Zarkalians had suffered their first defeat, yet humanity knew it was only a matter of time before the enemy returned in greater numbers. Earth needed an edge, something the Zarkalians wouldn't see coming. And deep within a classified military base, scientists were working on exactly that. Project Coastfire. Beneath the frozen wastelands of Europa, one of Jupiter's moons, a secret project had been underway for years. the best minds of humanity, led by Dr. Evelyn Ross, had been designing a weapon unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. It wasn't a massive warship. It wasn't a superweapon. It was something far deadlier. A stealth battleship. Codenamed Ghostfire, it was the first warship built with experimental cloaking technology. Unlike human and Zarkalian ships, which relied on brute force and shields, the Ghostfire was designed to be invisible, slipping past enemy defenses and striking where they least expected. Admiral Marcus Hayes arrived at the underground base, escorted by armed guards. He walked into the massive hangar, his eyes widening as he saw the ship. It was sleek, black as the void, and completely undetectable by standard sensors. Dr. Ross approached, her face filled with quiet confidence. "She's ready, Admiral. The Ghostfire can slip past their defenses, infiltrate enemy space, and strike at their supply chains. If we use it right, we could turn the tide of this war." Admiral Hayes crossed his arms. "Does it work?" A small smirk appeared on Ross's face. Only one way to find out. A dangerous mission. To test the Ghostfire, a high-risk mission was planned. A deep infiltration into Zarkalian territory. If successful, humanity could cripple the enemy's supply lines before their next invasion. But the mission required a pilot and a strike team willing to risk everything. Enter Lieutenant Ryan Carter. Still recovering from the Battle of Mars, Carter was handpicked for the job. He had proven himself to be not just a skilled pilot, but a soldier who never backed down, even in impossible odds. When Hayes approached him, Carter didn't hesitate. "When do we leave?" he asked. Infiltrating enemy space, the Ghostfire slipped into the darkness of space, heading straight for the Zarkalian war factories orbiting a distant planet. Inside the stealth ship, Carter sat in the cockpit, watching the enemy fleet completely unaware of their presence. "This is insane," whispered Sergeant Miles, one of the strike team members. "We're flying right into their backyard, and they don't even see us." "That's the point," Carter muttered, gripping the controls. "Let's make sure they never do." As the ship approached the Zarkalian station, they activated the ship's disruptor pulse, knocking out the facility's sensors for a few critical minutes. The strike team breached the station, planting explosives along key supply points. Then the alarms went off. "We've been spotted," someone shouted over comms. Zarkalian soldiers swarmed the station, engaging the human strike team in fierce combat. Plasma bolts flew in every direction as Carter led his squad through the chaos. "We need to get back to the ship," Carter yelled, firing at an advancing enemy. Dr. Ross, monitoring from the Ghostfire, activated the ship's remote recall system, and the team barely made it aboard as explosions ripped through the station. The moment they were inside, Carter punched the engines to max, and the Ghostfire vanished into the void, escaping just as the station erupted in a massive fireball. The war shifts. Back on Earth, the news of the mission's success spread quickly. The Zarkalian war machine had suffered its first major logistical failure, throwing their invasion plans into chaos. For the first time, humanity wasn't just defending. They were fighting back. But the war was far from over. The Zarkalians would not take this defeat lightly. And deep in their home system, Supreme Warlord Kratak was preparing for his deadliest move yet. The real war was about to begin. The destruction of the Zarkalian war factories sent shockwaves through the enemy ranks. For the first time in history, humanity had taken the fight to them. But the Zarkalians were not a race that accepted defeat easily. Supreme Warlord Kratak, leader of the Zarkalian Empire, watched the reports in silence. His burning yellow eyes narrowed as he studied the wreckage of the destroyed war station. His sharp claws tapped against the metal armrest of his throne. "They dare strike at us," his deep voice rumbled. "Then let us remind them why we are feared." With a flick of his claws, he issued the command. "Launch the Annihilation Fleet. The Zarkalian counterattack begins." The human fleet had barely begun celebrating their success when the enemy arrived. It started with a distress signal from Alpha Centauri, one of humanity's outermost colonies. The message was brief, filled with panic and static. "They're here, Zarkalian ships, too many. Oh God." Then silence. Admiral Marcus Hayes and his officers stared at the screen, tension filling the war room on Earth's command center. "They wiped out an entire colony in minutes," one officer said, his face pale. "And they won't stop there," Hayes muttered. He turned to his strategists. "What's their next target?" "Earth is in danger." Satellite readings confirmed it. The Zarkalians weren't just attacking outer colonies. They were heading straight for Earth. A fleet of over 500 warships, larger than anything humanity had faced before, was on a direct course for the homeworld. Dr. Evelyn Ross, still recovering from the recent Ghostfire mission, burst into the war room. "We have to evacuate the cities," she urged. "We're talking about mass planetary bombardment." Hayes shook his head. "We don't run," he said firmly. "If Earth falls, humanity falls." His gaze hardened. "We fight. The battle for Earth begins." As the Zarkalian fleet entered the solar system, every remaining UEDF warship was mobilized. Space stations were armed, planetary defenses powered up, and even civilian ships were refitted with makeshift weapons. Humanity was outnumbered 5-1, but they would not surrender. Ryan Carter, now one of the most recognized fighter pilots, climbed into his cockpit. His hands clenched the controls as he listened to the fleet-wide broadcast. "This is Admiral Hayes. Earth is our home. If we fall today, we fall as warriors. But I promise you this, today, the enemy will learn what it means to face humanity's fury. Hold the line." The comms erupted with battle cries. Then, the Zarkalians attacked. Chaos in the skies. The first wave hit like a storm of fire. Massive enemy dreadnoughts unleashed plasma bombardments, turning orbital defense platforms into dust. Swarms of enemy fighters poured into Earth's atmosphere, clashing with human squadrons. Cities below scrambled to activate energy shields, but some were already under attack. Ryan Carter's squadron weaved through the chaos, taking down enemy bombers before they could reach the surface. "Focus on the command ships," Carter shouted. "Cut off the head, and the body dies." But the Zarkalians were learning. They adapted, countered, and began overwhelming the human forces. Admiral Hayes clenched his fists as he watched the battle unfold. "We can't hold out forever." Dr. Ross's eyes flickered with desperation. "Then maybe it's time we stop fighting fair." A desperate plan. Deep inside Earth's command center, a last resort weapon was being activated. Project Stormbreaker, a planetary railgun, hidden beneath the Antarctic ice, capable of firing a projectile at near-light speed. Ross turned to Hayes. "We only get one shot," she warned. "Then let's make it count," he said. As the battle raged above, engineers powered up the weapon. The energy readings spiked as the massive cannon locked onto the largest Zarkalian dreadnought, their flagship. Supreme Warlord Kratak himself was on board. His reptilian lips curled into a sneer as he watched the human forces struggling. "Pathetic," he growled. "End them." Then the railgun fired. A streak of white-hot energy tore through the void, traveling so fast that no shields could stop it. It pierced straight through the Zarkalian flagship, ripping it in half. Kratak barely had time to scream before the explosion engulfed him, turning the tide. With their warlord dead, the Zarkalian fleet hesitated. Their forces fell into disarray. "Now's our chance," Carter yelled. The human fleet pushed back with everything they had. One by one, the Zarkalian ships began retreating, their invasion falling apart. When the last enemy vessel fled the system, the comms erupted in cheers. Earth had survived. But as Carter landed his fighter and stepped onto the charred, battle-worn surface, he knew this wasn't over. The Zarkalians had suffered a humiliating defeat, but they wouldn't stop. They would return, angrier than ever. And next time, they wouldn't just send warships. They would send something far worse. The skies above Earth were finally clear, but the victory felt hollow. The Zarkalians had been defeated, their fleet shattered, their warlord dead. Yet, no one on Earth dared to celebrate. Humanity had won the battle. But had they won the war? A warning from the stars. A week after the battle, deep space scanners picked up anomalous energy readings beyond Pluto's orbit. At first, UEDS scientists thought it was just debris from the Zarkalian retreat. Then the readings intensified. Dr. Evelyn Ross stared at the data on her screen, her face pale. This isn't normal. She quickly ran calculations. Her hands trembled. Admiral Hayes stood behind her. "What are we looking at, Doctor?" Ross turned, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something is coming. The Leviathan awakens. In the dark void beyond the solar system, something massive stirred. A Zarkalian superweapon, hidden away for centuries, now activated, summoned by the destruction of Supreme Warlord Kratak. They called it the Leviathan. Over 20 kilometers long. A living warship, part machine, part organic horror. Self-repairing hull. A core powered by the energy of dying stars. It wasn't just a ship, it was a god of war. And now it was heading straight for Earth. Preparing for the impossible. Alarms blared across every military station. UED of warships, still recovering from the last battle, were scrambled once again. Ryan Carter, still healing from his injuries, was pulled into a high-level briefing. He sat across from Admiral Hayes, Dr. Ross, and the remaining commanders. Hayes didn't waste time. "We have less than 48 hours before it reaches Earth. We need a plan." A hologram of the Leviathan appeared on the table. Even in a simulation, it looked terrifying. Sergeant Miles cursed under his breath. "We barely survived their fleet. How the hell are we supposed to stop that?" Ross exhaled sharply. "Conventional weapons won't work. Shields won't work. It's like fighting a moon-sized predator." Carter leaned forward. His voice was calm, but firm. "Then we don't fight it head-on." Everyone turned to him. "We take Ghostfire back out," he continued. "We infiltrate, get inside that thing, and destroy it from within." It was insane. It was suicidal. And it was humanity's only chance. Infiltrating the beast. The Ghostfire, humanity's only stealth battleship, was quickly prepped for launch. This time, they weren't just sneaking past enemy defenses. They were flying straight into the belly of the beast. Carter, Miles, and a team of elite operatives strapped in. Dr. Ross monitored from mission control. Approaching target, Carter whispered as the Leviathan's monstrous form filled the viewport. It wasn't just a ship. It was a city-sized nightmare covered in pulsing alien veins and shifting metallic armor. Ghostfire's cloaking system held steady. The ship drifted closer, closer, until a massive, glowing mouth opened. The Leviathan had sensed them. "Hold on," Carter shouted, gripping the controls as the ship was suddenly sucked inside. The Ghostfire vanished into the darkness. The fight inside. The team disembarked inside what looked like a twisted biomechanical cathedral. Walls pulsed like living organs. Strange energy currents flowed like blood through massive veins. "Stay close," Carter whispered. "We plant the charges and get the hell out." But as they moved forward, the walls shifted. Then the screaming began. Zarkalian warriors, fused into the ship itself, emerged from the living walls. Their eyes glowed with unnatural energy, their bodies twisted by the Leviathan's power. They weren't just soldiers anymore. They were part of the ship, and they were not letting the humans leave alive. The last stand. The battle inside the Leviathan was like fighting inside a nightmare. Carter's team fired round after round, but the creatures kept coming. The ship itself reacted, shifting its walls, trying to trap them inside. Miles planted the last of the fusion charges near what they believed was the core. "We're set," he yelled. "We need to go, now." But the Leviathan was aware. It spoke. A deep, thunderous voice echoed in their minds. You cannot destroy me. I am eternal. I am war itself. Carter gritted his teeth, staring into the pulsing core. Yeah, he muttered. Then let's see if war can survive a supernova. He activated the detonator. Escape or die. The team sprinted for the ghost fire as the Leviathan screamed in agony. The charges detonated in a chain reaction, ripping through the creature's insides. Carter launched the ghost fire out of the beast's collapsing body, speeding through tunnels of fire and debris. The Leviathan convulsed, its glowing core imploding. And then, with one final, earth-shaking explosion, it was gone. Victory, but at what cost? Back on Earth, cheers erupted as the Leviathan's death was confirmed. The war was finally over. The Zarkalians had been crushed. But Carter, Ross, and Hayes stood in silence, watching the wreckage float in the void. Humanity had survived. But at what cost? Dr. Ross spoke first. That thing. It wasn't just a ship. It was something else. Hayes exhaled. And what if the Zarkalians weren't the only ones who had something like this? Carter clenched his fists. Then we get ready. He looked up at the stars. Because next time, we won't be waiting. The destruction of the Leviathan should have meant victory. The Zarkalians had been defeated, their fleet scattered, their most powerful weapon reduced to cosmic dust. But deep in the void, something was watching. Something far worse. The message from the abyss. It started as a whisper. Dr. Evelyn Ross sat alone in the UEDF science lab, staring at her screen. The readings from the Leviathan's explosion were wrong. Energy signatures didn't just vanish like this. Then her computer flickered. A low, vibrating tone filled the room. The monitors glitched. And then, a transmission appeared. A deep, distorted voice spoke through the static. You killed one of our pets. Ross's breath caught in her throat. Now we are coming for you. Then, silence. Something is out there. Ross sprinted to the war room, slamming the emergency alarm. Admiral Hayes and Ryan Carter rushed in. We have a problem, Ross gasped. A big one. She pulled up the transmission logs. This isn't Zarkalian tech, she said. It's older. Something ancient. Hayes frowned. We just wiped out their last superweapon. What else could be out there? Ross's fingers trembled as she zoomed in on a single energy signature located in the farthest reaches of known space. It's not a what, she whispered. It's a who. The Lost Empire. The Zarkalians were warriors, brutal and cruel. But they weren't the first conquerors of the galaxy. Thousands of years ago, before even the Zarkalians rose to power, there had been another empire. A race so powerful that the mere mention of their name had been erased from history, the Xilari. Legends spoke of them as gods of destruction, a species that built entire living planets and then fed on their energy. Then, one day, they had vanished, or so everyone believed. A shadow in the void. The energy signature detected by Ross wasn't random noise. It was a beacon. Something had woken up. Satellite images showed a dark shape moving beyond the edges of the galaxy. It was colossal, far larger than even the Leviathan. And it was coming. We might have just started a war we can't win, Ross whispered. Carter clenched his fists. Then we end it before it begins. Hayes nodded. We take the fight to them, before they reach Earth. They had no idea what they were up against. But humanity wasn't about to wait for death. The final mission begins. Coastfire was prepped for one last mission. Carter and his team suited up. The plan was simple but impossible. Locate the Xilari, gather intelligence, and find a weakness. As Carter stepped onto the bridge, Miles nudged him. You ever get tired of flying straight into death? Carter smirked. Not yet. The engines roared to life. Their ship disappeared into the void, heading straight toward the oldest, most feared enemy in the universe. And this time, humanity wasn't just fighting for survival. They were fighting to end the war before it even began. The ghost fire moved through the void, its cloaking systems fully engaged. The crew sat in tense silence as the ship approached the source of the transmission, a dark region of space where no light seemed to escape. Ryan Carter stared at the vast, empty abyss ahead. "I don't like this," he muttered. "It's too quiet." Dr. Evelyn Ross, monitoring the ship's sensors, suddenly stiffened. "We're not alone," she whispered. And then, the stars disappeared. The arrival of the Escalated. A massive shape emerged from the darkness. It wasn't a ship. It wasn't even a fleet. It was a planet-sized entity, shifting and pulsing with unnatural energy. Its surface was a swirling mass of living metal, shifting structures, and glowing veins of pure energy. Ross's voice trembled. "It's alive." Admiral Hayes's voice came through the comms. "What the hell are we looking at? Ghost fire." Carter exhaled sharply. "I think we just found the Escalated. Or rather, they had found us. A mind beyond comprehension." A sudden pulse of energy struck the ghost fire. The ship's systems shut down instantly. Lights flickered, screens went dark, and for a terrifying moment, everything was silent. Then a voice spoke, not through the comms, but directly into their minds. "You are insects crawling through our domain. You destroyed our pet. You interfered where you should not have. Now you will understand what true power is." Carter gritted his teeth, fighting against the overwhelming pressure in his skull. "Get out of my head," he growled. The Escalary's presence grew stronger, filling the ship with an unbearable sense of dread. "Your kind has fought and bled. You believe yourselves strong. We were here before your sun burned. We watched empires rise and fall. And now, we will watch you burn." The ghost fire's desperate move. Alarms blared as power partially returned to the ghost fire. The Escalated were playing with them, as if testing their reactions. Carter snapped into action. "Ross, is there any way to disrupt their control?" Ross frantically worked the controls. "They're using some kind of telepathic link. If we overload our own neural dampeners, we might be able to break free." "Do it," Carter shouted. Ross activated the dampeners, sending a shockwave of psychic interference throughout the ship. The crushing pressure in their minds suddenly lifted. The Escalated hesitated. For the first time, they had lost control. And Carter wasn't going to waste the moment. "Fire EV thing," he roared. The ghost fire unleashed its full arsenal: plasma torpedoes, ion disruptors, and the experimental dark matter cannon. The Escalated screamed. The massive entity reeled back, its living metal surface rippling as explosions tore through it. But Carter knew the truth. They weren't winning. They were only making it angry. The reckoning. The Escalated shifted, its massive form twisting as it prepared to retaliate. Ghost fire sensors went wild. "It's charging something," Ross cried. "A full-scale energy pulse. If it hit them, they wouldn't just die. They would cease to exist." Admiral Hayes's voice crackled through the comms. "Ghostfire, you need to get out of there. Now." Carter's hands flew across the controls. Evasive maneuvers. "Get us the hell out of." Boom. A blinding shockwave of energy erupted from the Escalated, swallowing everything in its path. Ghostfire was hit. The ship spun wildly, alarms blaring, hull cracking under the force. The crew was slammed against their seats as the ship tumbled through space. The last thing Carter saw was the burning light of the Escalary's fury. And then, darkness. The war has truly begun. Hours later, Carter woke up to the distant sound of beeping. His vision was blurry, his body aching. "Ryan," Ross's voice called out. "He's awake." He forced himself to sit up. They were in an emergency medical bay aboard a UEDF battleship. Hayes stood over him, his face grim. "You're lucky to be alive." Carter exhaled, his head pounding. "What happened?" Ross swallowed hard. The ghost fire barely made it out. The Escalated, They let us go. Carter froze. They let us go. Hayes nodded. They wanted us to deliver a message. Ross pulled up a transmission. The same deep, overwhelming voice from before. Run, little humans. Prepare your armies. Because when we return, we will erase your kind from existence. Carter clenched his fists. His body was weak, but his spirit was unbreakable. They think we'll run. He exhaled, a fire burning in his eyes. No, we're done running. He stood up, despite the pain. Now, we take the fight to them.